Feeling good today. Feeling lovely, yeah. Just another day. Well, I apologize.
Welcome back to the Muslim Street. We're here in the studio with my co-host Laila Abdelaziz and attorney Hassan Shibly with CARE. We're talking about some of the oppressive issues, and also up next, my boy Larry G is in the house. So stay tuned after the Muslim Street and tune in to Larry G. Hassan, before we went to break, we were talking about this newspaper owner of a newspaper, the Atlanta Jewish Times, just coming out talking about the assassination of President Obama, and the fact that that is not on world news is just incredible. And we talked about the double standard.
And a couple of months ago, Malik, sorry, you just jogged my memory. A person, a bearded individual, we'll say, took a gun and fired shots at the White House.
At the White House.
At the White House. And this wasn't a bearded Muslim. In fact, He was an individual who had an Israel tattoo on his body. And again, this doesn't represent Israel, it doesn't represent Jewish Americans, but it goes back to that double standard that any time a member of my faith, the Muslim faith, commits a crime, I got to take the blame for it. My children have to take the blame for it. My family has to take the blame for it. Why? Because we're Muslims. And unfortunately, the ignorant amongst us like to judge the entire group by the acts of an individual. When a Muslim does the crime. Unfortunately, when any other minority does the crime, the rest of the minority doesn't take the blame, unless you're African American. That is sometimes.
Yeah, let's look at the case of Timothy McVeigh. He wasn't called a Christian terrorist. Very much so, he was a Christian. He was strong in his faith. He was part of a militia that led with their Christian faith. But when there's reference to him and his cohorts, they don't use that type of terminology, the terminology of crusaders. So this double standard will stop when Muslims like us and use the forums like this begin to call out its inaccuracies.
That's what we have to do. We have to speak out and define ourselves, because if we don't, others will.
The Florida Family Association has decided to speak out and speak on your behalf and say that apparently you do not know Islam, do not represent Islam the way that you do. And they're very upset that you're speaking to school children about the subject of Islam, which you are a Muslim American man. You're a executive director of the Council on American Islamic Relations. I don't see why you're not fit to discuss Islam with students, but I definitely want to talk about what's going on at the CARE office. How's your experience going there? How are you battling this Islamophobia that's being directed to you?
CARE is an amazing organization. It's a very vibrant organization. We're growing every week. We're tons of volunteers. The majority, actually, of people who want to volunteer and help us out are not from the Muslim community. They're just regular folks. I just had a 35-year-old professional white guy from New York come into the office the other day and offer his services to volunteer. I said, what makes you interested in helping out for CARE? He said, listen, I'm just sick of Islamophobia. Not in my name. I will not let this hatred be promoted in my name. And I think Americans can all unite against Islamophobia because it's hatred. It's just a different kind of phobia. It's a different kind of hatred. It's a different kind of xenophobia. And we're recognizing that in these difficult economic times that there's no room for this hatred, and this hatred is going to divide us. It's not going to bring us together. And it's interesting because people like Caton and those that are leading the attacks against us, their biggest weapon is lies and misinformation. One of the interesting things I saw that Caton had based on the show that we did a couple weeks ago is he said, and I remember the sentence, Hassan Shibly opposes the detention of suspected terrorists. I said, absolutely not. Where did I ever oppose the detention of suspected terrorists? I said, what I opposed was the indefinite detention of American citizens without due process of law. And anybody that believes in the U.S. Constitution would oppose that. Anybody that believes in the rule of law would oppose that. But they just like to promote fear and hatred. And it's amazing. This week, the individual, he went ahead on a crusade against the Tampa Tribune, of all papers. Why? Because it didn't support his bigotry. It didn't support his hatred. In fact, it was critical of his campaign against Islam and American Muslims. But the interesting thing is he didn't go after the St. Pete Times. And in fact, he compared the Tampa Tribune to the St. Pete Times to show how the Tampa Tribune was more, the St. Pete Times was more sympathetic to his cause. However, if you read the editorials that the St. Pete Times, or the Tampa Times, wrote against him, they wrote that, in fact, the title was, David Caton is a biblical bully who just needs to shut up. So neither of the two major papers in Tampa are supporting Caton, and he's just trying to go after one or the other. He's trying to intimidate and control our public discourse, and we can't let him control our discourse. We can't be intimidated by him. He's trying to shut up anybody that opposes his narrow-minded, bigoted views. And it's up to the good-hearted Americans to say, listen, we don't listen to the KKK, we don't listen to the FAA. Or FFA.
Yeah,
Sorry.
definitely. We do listen to the FFA.
Yes, absolutely.
The FAA. And speaking of the inaccuracies that are very across the board in terms of Islamophobia, I saw in Fear Inc. that report that we were telling you about earlier on the show, that a recent report from the ACLU, from the American Civil Liberties Union, reported that anti-Sharia crusaders have failed to demonstrate a single case of Sharia infiltrating U.S. courts. I never thought of it that way. They never thought of it that way.
It doesn't surprise me. I mean, it's a witch hunt. It's a made-up witch hunt. It's a problem in search of a solution. And the 10th Circuit just confirmed our arguments. The 10th Circuit just very recently basically supported the injunction against the law in Oklahoma. Oklahoma voters, unfortunately, overwhelmingly passed a law to ban the Islamic tradition in the state of Oklahoma.
Let me ask you a question, Hassan, from a legal perspective. Are there any other religious groups, i.e. Jewish or Christian groups, who use their religious tenets or framework if there's let's say, a civil dispute between one Christian to another or one Jew to another Jew, to settle the issue outside of the American courts? Is there a precedent for that? Is anything going on?
I mean, one of the things we respect in the courts is called arbitration and mediation, and that is that, listen, if you and me get in a dispute, we don't want to end up paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to lawyers, though I would like it, right, as a lawyer, but we want to settle it quickly, conveniently, according to our morals and principles. So what we do is we both select an arbitrator or a mediator, and you're free to choose any mediator you want, and he will settle the dispute according to the morals and traditions you both believe in, however, also under the traditional, the law of the land. So basically, there's never been an instance in the United States where Islamic law has been opposed in a way that contradicts American law. It just won't happen. It hasn't happened. It's a ridiculous notion. It's a ridiculous tradition. And by the way, Jewish Americans, for example, they conduct businesses according some to their law.
Rabbinical law.
Exactly. Just the kosher. That's all about the Jewish traditional law.
Yeah, I said it. I moderated a conference back in February, Jackson, Mississippi. There was a judge, and she spoke on the panel, and she was complaining about, or at least citing, the fact that the dockets are full. Just incredible. And the courts are flooded. And in the case of civil cases, she said this, and I'll be quite frank with you. She said that if there's a situation, and she was considering this as the judge of her court, where two Muslims had a civil issue, not a criminal issue, but a civil issue between each other, and if they were willing, and she was driving the issue, that if they were willing to settle that within themselves, with an imam being the moderator or the arbitrator in this case, she would totally allow that. And not only that, she sat over the court in the black community in this particular Mississippi town, which has a significant Muslim community, both immigrant and black. And at the same time, the dockets are full because of criminal issues that they just don't have. The jails are too full. They can't get to them. So as a way to, as she cited, a way to relieve the stress on her court, the overcrowding of a court, she was more than happy to consider that. And she was the one that brought that issue to the front.
Well, it all goes back to one of the basic principles we have in the U.S. law, which is called the freedom to contract. So me and you are free to contract to resolve our disputes that come up between us in civil situations according to any way that's permissible under U.S. law. And one of the ways that U.S. law allows disputes to be settled is by arbitration and mediation.
Sure.
And we have right, as Americans, to pick who our mediators will be and according to what general framework our disputes will be resolved, again, as long as it's within the framework of the U.S. law. But the main point I want to take it back to, Malik, is that this really isn't about Muslims taking over their law. It's really what it is about. Again, it's promoting more fear and hatred of American Muslims, and it's just unconstitutional. It's un-American to ban any religious tradition. These laws, like the law that was passed in Oklahoma, did not just ban Muslims from using their tradition in how they settle disputes with each other, but it banned the basic principles of Islamic law, like respecting one's parents, honoring one's spouse, providing for one's children. That's all part of Sharia. That's all part of Islamic tradition, the Islamic tradition. And the 10th Circuit did its duty and said, hey, this country stands on the idea that of religious freedom.
Yeah, I saw
we will not discriminate against anybody based on their religion.
Yeah, I saw some middle class housewife in Oklahoma on the news, and she said they want to bring Sharia law to our country and just take over. I'm like, where did you get that from? You know where she got it from? The hatred that's so vile and prevalent in the United States right now.
Well, all these talking points are coming from from a small group of sources, and those sources are all highlighted in the Fear Inc. report. It's about less than a dozen individuals who are fabricating these lies.
And we're going to put a link to that report on our website at muslimstreet.net and try to get the word out. I mean, some very good reading in there. Yeah.
It's a must read, and it comes to a very good conclusion. The framework of the fear, of the distraction, of this division within the society really serves one purpose, and that purpose has been proven, and that purpose is that it helps the Conservative Party win. And I mean, that's what
wedge issues.
That's what
throwing red meat at the base. Wedge issues, and this is the new wedge.
Distracting. I mean, to distract from the real issues, and that's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And we got to bring the issues back to the things that really affect us as Americans.
Definitely, definitely. I want to thank you all for joining us on this Sunday evening, listening to the Muslim Street. I really want to thank Hassan Shibly, who is an attorney and executive director of CARE Tampa. Thank you again for joining us on the Muslim Street. Thank you, Malik, and join us next weekend. We'll be updating you guys on our Facebook page and online on muslimstreet.net. It's been great to be on the air today.